The Space Marines of the Astartes are known far and wide as the heroes of the Imperium of Man, created by the Emperor of Mankind to be the ideal soldier who would wage his great crusade to unite humanity scattered across the stars. While each of the 18 legions and their primarchs were free to use their own preferred methods to prosecute the Emperor's wars, the 8th Legion, the Night Lords, elicited more dread than any other. These pale warriors of the night, clad in dark blue and brass, used fear and terror tactics against their unfortunate foes with ruthless efficiency. Molded into merciless and uncompromising warriors of terror by their equally terrifying Primarch, Conrad Kurz. At the eruption of the Horus Heresy, Kurz and his legion were one of 9 to join the side of Chaos, though Conrad's reasons for damning his entire legion and himself may not be as straightforward as that of his brothers. Who was Conrad Kurz and who are the Night Lords? Why did they turn to Chaos and what made them the most feared of all the Space Marine legions? Let's get into it. Welcome back to StarHammer. Thousands of years ago, when the Emperor first sought recruits for the Space Marine legions, he pulled men in from all walks of life across Terra. Sons of nobility, peasants from factories, and even the deepest depths of the many hive cities that catacomb the planet. In these depths, there lived exiled men and women who had been banished from society above for one reason or another. In the blinding darkness, there wasn't a semblance of law and order that emanated from the Raptor Imperialis banners of the Emperor, but bloody and disgusting chaos. Only the most decisive, ruthless, and cunning of individuals survived the prison sinks of the hive cities, and these individuals survived long enough to make their twisted offspring. These children of darkness were raised by death. And it's these children that the Emperor sought to raise up to become Space Marines of the 8th Legion. When combined with the gene seed of their estranged Primarch, the new Marines gained even paler skin and the ability to see in almost total darkness. But it made them highly light sensitive and forced them to view the world through filtered visors. Though they now walked in the light above, the 8th Legion was forever cursed to be in perpetual darkness. As if to consummate their relationship to the light, the 8th Legion was deployed on Terra to bring to heel those who believed they could rebel against the newborn Imperium of Man. Those who thought they could continue the barbaric ways of Old Night were swiftly and decisively crushed by the 8th Legion, who seemed almost born for the task. In order to ensure continued obedience, the 8th Legion had a very my way or the highway approach. Moral absolution was their sword, and shades of gray were non-existent. It was black and white, and by rebelling against the doctrines of the Imperium, you fell on the wrong side of that spectrum. They made examples out of the rebellions they squashed, ensuring fear made the others fall in line. Yet, despite their cold and brutal approach to warfare, when Conrad Kurz entered the picture, the 8th Legion brought new meaning to the term of terror troop. Kurz grew up on Nostromo, a polluted hive world. It was a dark, violent, and lawless realm. A planet in eternal darkness due to the massive amounts of pollution pumped into the sky by the giant adamantine factories that were the primary industry on the surface. The light of Nostromo's dying star could barely penetrate the smog, and there was barely a visible difference between night and day. Enter Conrad Kurz, who would come to be known on Nostromo as the Night Haunter. Unlike his brothers, Kurz never knew the love of an adoptive family or the guiding hand of a mentor in his youth. Instead, Kurz had to fend for himself. He grew up quickly and survived by feasting on the mutated rats that infested the depths of his hive city. As a Primarch, his body and mind were far more resilient than the mortals around him, and Kurz used this to his advantage, perpetuating more and more ruthless atrocities upon the underworld gangsters and criminals as he aged, and eventually he made a name for himself. Over time, his city's ballooning crime rate dropped to nothing, as residents lived in fear of the Night Haunter, and what he would do to them if he found them out after dark or misbehaving in the slightest. Eventually, Kurz became the dictator of his world through his superhuman cunning and cruelty to those who dared oppose his rule of law. Though he was seen as a tempered and reasonable ruler, any whisper of a lawbreaker that reached his ears would earn his personal ire. He would stalk and mutilate his prey, making an example out of them, and showing that law and order was indeed a matter of black and white. Not dissimilar to the same philosophy of the 8th Legion he was soon to lead. As Conrad was the Emperor's son, he inherited a tiny sliver of his father's psychic abilities. In Conrad's case, this ability was precognition, the ability to see the future. But whereas the Emperor could see many possible futures, Conrad only saw one. In that future, he saw only suffering, death, and failure for himself. No matter what he did in an attempt to alter it, the precognitive dreams would always come to the same end result. These would haunt him throughout his life. And when the Emperor came to Nostromo to bring his son home, Conrad already had an idea of what fate had in store for him. About 100 years after the start of the Great Crusade, the Emperor arrived at Nostromo. As he led his delegation to meet Kurz, the citizens of Nostromo experienced radiant light for the first time, barely able to look in the direction of the Emperor without being literally blinded by his divine light. As Conrad awaited the Emperor, he slipped into a vision, the worst he had ever had. So bad, in fact, that he attempted to claw out his own eyes, but he was stopped by the Emperor. As he looked up into the Emperor's eyes, his father said, "Be at peace, Conrad Kurz. I have arrived, and I intend to take you home." Kurz coldly replied, "That is not my name, father. My people gave me a name, and I will bear it until my dying day, and I know full well what you intend for me." But Kurz submitted to the Emperor, already knowing, though not exactly how, that the path he was to embark upon would lead to his and his people's destruction. Under his brother Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children Legion, Conrad was brought up to speed about the Imperium, their general rules of war, and everything he needed to know to be an effective commander of the 8th Legion of Astartes. After he took control of them, he christened them the Night Lords, and went about the business of bringing planets into Imperial compliance. Conrad's sinister upbringing influenced how he taught his legion. The 8th already had a terrifying reputation, but being reunited with their Gene Father taught them new methods of sowing discord and weaponizing fear. He instructed them to decorate their armor in ways that amplified their already horrific methods of waging war in an effort to further demoralize the enemy. Making skin capes out of flayed victims, having severed heads dangling from their belts, and all manner of disgusting personalization. Though the Night Lords and their methods were extreme, their record of bringing worlds into the Imperium was exemplary. Even the rumor of the Night Lords in a renegade system was often enough to pacify delinquent worlds. And so, Kurz and the Night Lords brought peace through atrocity. Sometimes there was a method to this madness. Where the Drukhari were engaging in similarly horrific acts out of necessity as much as enjoyment, the Night Lords often crucified entire cities, or worse, simply because they thought it was fun. Though the Emperor had concerns about Kurz's growing instability and his legion as a whole, he allowed the Night Lords to continue to bring terror to the humans of the galaxy that the Emperor claimed he was trying to save. Besides receiving a slap on the wrist, the Night Lords waged their cruel wars with impunity. Even with their turn to chaos, Night Lord combat doctrine changed a little. Space Marines in 8th Legion, in a way, never really cared for the Great Crusade or even the mandates of the Chaos Gods later on. They were in it for the love of the game. And that's not to say all the Night Lords were like that. We'll get to that in a minute. When coming upon a world, the Night Lords were known to jam all communications and broadcast twisted screams of tortured souls across the Vox channels to prepare the unfortunate souls below for their arrival. These masters of stealth will then infiltrate behind enemy lines and brutalize enemies for their friends to find later. Once they weaken a position enough, a popular tactic is to then broadcast a modified scream of terror across the Vox channels that bursts the eardrums of anyone nearby with unprotected hearing. Once everyone is doubled over and bleeding out of their ears, the Night Lords descend upon them. Though they are highly capable warriors, the Night Lords have always preferred preying upon defenseless and weaker civilian populations. Maybe this is more enjoyable because there's nobody to oppose them and they don't need to stop their tormented pleasures to fight. Who could know? But to nobody's surprise, the Night Lords are one of the 9 traitor legions that sided with Horus in an attempt to overthrow the Emperor. But why? The Night Lords have been an exceptionally successful legion up until this point. Conrad was a fantastic commander, so what drove them to such treachery? Well, Kurz's visions had only been growing in severity and frequency as the Great Crusade forged on. He often removed himself from the presence of the other Primarchs as he struggled with the deep depression of constantly seeing glimpses of a future where his legion was aimless, the galaxy is in anarchy, and his own death. Top that off with the lack of moderation for the Night Lord's actions, and the rift between the 8th and Conrad and his brothers only widened as time went on. This came to a head at the end of the Charo campaign, a long and bloody conflict waged by the Night Lords, Emperor's Children, and Imperial Fists against a strong and proud lost human enclave that refused to join the Imperium. Primarch of the Imperial Fists, Rogel Dorn, and Kurz had been coming to disagreements for the length of the war. Eventually, this resulted in Dorn and Kurz coming to blows. Kurz had confided in his old friend Fulgrim about his visions and the issues that had been stemming from them, to which Fulgrim, concerned for his fellow Primarch, decided to include Dorn in the conversation. Dorn already scorned the Night Lords and Conrad for their excessive brutality, which he viewed as an affront to the good name of the Emperor. So, when Fulgrim told him of Kurz's past and the issues he was having, Dorn decided to confront Conrad directly. Nobody knows exactly what went down, but all but one of Kurz' guards were slain, and Dorn himself was found seriously injured. In response, Kurz was imprisoned on Charo, while the other Primarchs figured out how to address such a grievous and foul betrayal. But a trial would never come, as Kurz broke free of his imprisonment and killed every single Astartes warrior that stood in his way. Kurz took his legion and decided to fulfill a part of his visions by destroying his old homeworld. After learning of its descent back into lawless chaos, Kurz saw no reason for the planet to live any longer, and, from what I can tell, he was looking to speed up the prophecy of his own doom and take as many people with him as he could. It's important to remember that Kurz was the one responsible for Nostromo's peace back in the day. Sure, his methods were horrific, cruel, but he had brought law and justice to a previously lawless land. The entire idea behind what Kurz did and the beliefs he held were that nobody is above the law, and that only through the most brutal application of it could peace be achieved. And in essence, actions have consequences. Nostromo had made Kurz, and by extension the Night Lords, who they are today. Destroying it was Kurz's way of severing any connection to his old life, and his connection to any hope that the law could succeed at all. And accounts vary on what happened next. In one account, Kurz and the Eighth were recalled to Terra to answer for why they enacted exterminatus on their homeworld. Kurz explained to the Emperor and the Council of Terra that Nostromo had slid back into violent anarchy and was in no way redeemable. Kurz argued that his actions on Nostromo, and during the Crusade in general, were simply a consequence of the mission that they had been charged with. That state-sponsored terrorism was the entire spirit of the Crusade anyway, being as how they were forcing terrified and often primitive peoples under the Imperial banner. Kurz saw his actions as justified, in that he and his legion were the very embodiment of the fear and respect humanity owed to the Imperium. In essence, Kurz saw the Emperor as a hypocrite for punishing him for previously acceptable actions that every other Primarch and their legion had engaged in, including the Emperor himself, at one time or another. In the other account, Kurz didn't go to Terra at all, and no sort of action was taken against him, and business went on as usual, because the Primarchs and the Emperor considered it a freak situation that didn't warrant any massive undertaking of disciplinary action. A lot less exciting in that one, right? Just a short time before the eruption of the Horus Heresy, Kurz was on the brink of insanity. The precognitive visions he had inherited from the Emperor causing him no small amount of misery. He was largely absent from leading his Astartes, leaving them to find their own path and causing factions to form. Some wanted to stride forward with the glorious purpose that the Great Crusade had provided them, but others preferred to indulge in their mindless slaughter and planetary torture without any regard for anything else. This eventually led to a small-scale civil war within the Legion, as each side believed the other to be the detestable traitors and criminals the Legion and its Primarch had long sought to erase from the Imperium. Kurz saw this coming, and in a way, it's what pushed him over the edge. This wasn't the doom he had foresaw for his legion and himself, but it was a small taste of what was to come. What Conrad had come to realize is that no matter what side he aligned himself with, whether it was the Emperor or Chaos, the end result would be the same. The centuries of warfare and atrocities he had committed were for nothing. The Imperium's law, which he and his legion enforced and enacted with ruthless terror, was meaningless. For all he had done to change the course of his visions, none of it made a difference. He and his legion were damned from the start. This flood of existential nihilism and the Emperor's perceived hypocrisy is what led Kurz and his legion to align themselves with Horus, who took full advantage of it. Horus used the Night Lords as the vanguard of his advance on Terra, giving them free reign to crucify entire worlds to herald Horus's arrival as their benevolent savior. To those who bent the knee, they were ultimately spared from the Night Lord's wrath, and those that refused suffered fates that were too terrible to be put into words. Without structure to guide them, the Night Lords and their Primarch had no limits to contend with. Dishing out death and destruction in their most horrific forms, the 8th Legion went from a disciplined fighting force to a band of chaotic sadists who cared little for anything outside of who they could flay alive next. Kurz had previously held the teaching to his people and his Astartes that actions must have consequences, but under Horus, such a rule no longer applied. And so, the Night Lords and Kurz were left to their own devices. Such was evident when the Night Lords and the Dark Angels met in pitched combat during the Thermos Crusade. The Night Lords, though they attempted to unite, have been stretched dangerously thin due to their own hubris and lack of central authority. Conrad and his brother Lionel Johnson had even come to blows during this bloody crusade, with both sustaining grievous wounds from the other. Though the Dark Angels were inflicting heavy casualties among the Night Lords, Kurz himself was the one that would actually put the nail in the coffin. As the Night Lords fled the wrath of the Dark Angels to join Horus's main force, Kurz canceled the retreat and ordered them to engage the Loyalists. In his eyes, it was to be the last hurrah, for after all, None of it could change the course of the dark history Kurz saw for himself. Essentially, fuck it, we ball. The survivors of that vain assault scattered across the galaxy, and the Night Lords are broken into little more than rampaging war bands, though some did join in on the siege of Terra along with the rest of the traitors. Kurz himself was later bested on Macragge by Guilliman, Sanguinius, and Johnson, but was later put in stasis and blasted into space by Sanguinius as the Blood Angels raced to defend Terra against Horus. If I ever do a video on Kurz himself, we'll get more into that, but we still got some ground to cover. That whole exchange between those four is really interesting, and I highly recommend checking it out if you got the time. Moving on. So, with the Night Lords scattered and Kurz drifting through the cold blackness of space, what became of the 8th Legion? Well, after the Siege of Terra, the surviving Night Lords didn't join their traitor cousins in the Eye of Terror, but instead carved out a small mini-empire of their own within Imperial space, claiming entire worlds as monuments to pain and suffering. The Night Lords are now divided into several raiding warbands, with some hiring themselves out as mercenaries, some attempting to reunite the Legion under their own banner, and some just rampaging across the galaxy and sowing chaos for the sake of chaos. Kurz, ever ready to fulfill what he believed was the prophecy ending in his own death, allowed an Imperial Calidus assassin to track him to the Night Lord fortress on Saglasa and land a mortally wounding shot on the fallen Primarch. Kurz willingly let himself slip into the void, believing that all the actions he had committed were right, and that him and the Emperor weren't so different in the end. Despite the difference in methodology, both Kurz and the Emperor wanted the same end result, law and order, and Kurz went to his grave finally relieved of his mental anguish and with a feeling of vindication that, just like his father, the ends truly did justify the means. As for the 8th Legion, the Night Lords continued to pillage and plunder across the galaxy, often without rhyme or reason. They're known to serve chaos undivided, and they'll join in on Black Crusades and other operations when they're asked, but for the most part, this once proud Legion of Astartes is only concerned pursuing their own depravity and are but a shadow of their former selves. And that's it for this one, y'all. After the Thousand Suns, the Night Lords are my favorite Chaos Legion, and what better time to celebrate their lore than during the spooky season. As always, drop a like if you like it, subscribe if you really liked it, check out my community tab for shitposts and shenanigans. See y'all in the next one. Doodles.